The air in the sun-drenched, vaulted dining room of my childhood home felt thick enough to choke on. The antique regulator clock my grandfather brought over from Germany talked with a deafening finality, each swing of the pendulum counting down the seconds of my old life. My spine was straight, rigid, an echo of the formality Tinsley Monroe always demanded. She sat across the immense, polished cedar tabula piece my late father, a master craftsman, had custom-built her platinum hair severely slicked back, her face a mask of elegant detachment that never seemed to wrinkle, even when she smiled. Flanking her were her children, Brody and Kensington Kenzie, perfectly posed like expensive props in her high-end tech lobbying brochure. They were a unified, impenetrable front, which was strange. Considering this was supposed to be a routine check-in about the funding for my postgraduate public policy thesis, "Thank you for coming, Cody," Tinsley said. Her voice like perfectly chilled Chardonnay crisp, dry and utterly lacking warmth. "We need to address your postgraduate fund." My heart ridiculously gave a hopeful little jump. I've already secured my provisional acceptance to the UW Public Policy program. And I have the proposed budget for the first 2 years of the thesis work ready. The deadline for the initial transfer is next month. I reached into my worn leather messenger bag, but her hand snapped up, cutting me off. "And that, Dakota, won't be necessary." She steepled her perfectly manicured French-tipped fingers on the table. The light streaming through the massive bay window caught the immense solitaire on her ring finger, making it sparkle like a tiny, cruel star. The fund, simply put, has suffered a catastrophic loss. The venture capital market instability and the subsequent property downturn wiped out the majority of its reserves. The words hit the silence like a dropped glass, shattering the air. I waited, my mind scrambling for the context switch, the punchline that would make them all laugh and tell me it was an awful joke. What? The sound was barely a puff of air. Brody, looking bored out of his mind in a designer hoodie, shifted in his chair, the heavy gold chain around his neck catching the light. Total market volatility, Cody. Nobody could predict the collapse of the waterfront housing bubble. Tinsley gave a curt nod. We salvaged what was left, of course, but it's a sliver. There is only enough remaining to cover a single year of rent in your current small apartment and absolutely nothing for the actual thesis, the field work, or the required tech purchases. The entire $950,000 intended for your future housing and business seed gone. The regulator clock's talk became a relentless physical assault against my eardrums. My hands, resting on my lap, went instantly ice cold, the blood seemingly retreating from my core. I stared at the face of the woman who had been my stepmother for 5 years, trying to find a flicker of regret, any hint of compassion for the daughter of the man who married her. Nothing but cool, expensive indifference. "That's impossible," I finally whispered, the horror starting to bloom in my chest. "Dad set up that fund with over $1 million. It was supposed to be in highly secure, low-risk accounts." My father's face, Thomas Ray, flashed in my memory, his strong, kind hands calloused from a lifetime of shaping wood, his gentle eyes crinkling at the corners as he sat me down in his Seattle studio on my 18th birthday. "Your future is safe, sweet pea," he'd promised, sliding the thick trust document across his workbench. "This will cover your housing after graduation, get your city revitalization studio off the ground. Maybe even buy your first piece of commercial property. No matter what happens to me, you'll always be able to build your life." Cody Thomas Ray had been a master craftsman. His custom furniture and architectural millwork studio, Ray Fine Woodworking, designing and building pieces that graced every million-dollar home in the Seattle area. The soaring, timber-framed structure we were sitting in, with its custom joinery and hand-planed walls, was his greatest physical testament, the perfect home he'd crafted for us. My mother, Sarah, had been the heart of the business mind. The artist, the one who saw the designs in the raw wood. She passed away when I was 16, the victim of a sudden, brutal illness. I still remember the smell of her beeswax polish and sandalwood perfume, After she died, Dad retreated into his work, turning out masterpieces at an alarming rate. The only person who could drag him out of the studio was my Uncle Bo Ledger. It's my mom's older brother, the retired naval architect who specialized in deep-sea technology. Bo and Dad, despite their different worlds, had an unbreakable bond built on shared grief and mutual respect for craft. Their friendship had been fractured just before Dad's death, though over Dad's choice to marry Tinsley, his new high-profile corporate lobbyist. Bo had warned him outright, calling Tinsley a venomous viper masquerading in cashmere. Dad, blinded by his own grief and, honestly, captivated by Tinsley's expensive veneer, had dismissed Bo's warnings. "She's grounding Bo. She understands business," he'd said. "And you're giving away Sarah's legacy," Bo had fired back. They never reconciled. And then, for years after Dad died unexpectedly from a massive stroke at 52, I was 20, suddenly orphaned with Tinsley, the woman he'd married 2 years earlier as the designated trustee of my fund until I turned 28. The will was clear. Tinsley was to ensure financial stability and counsel for Dakota during her formative postgraduate years. I never questioned it. Dad knew best. Dad had a plan. Dad, I now realized, had been completely, tragically wrong. Where exactly did the money go? My voice was shaking now, the full, crushing weight of my situation pressing in. That was a secure investment portfolio. It was explicitly restricted from higher-risk real estate or single-stock ventures. Tinsley sighed, a dramatic, weary sound that implied I was being difficult. Your father, bless his traditional heart, was too focused on physical assets. The initial strategy was too conservative to keep pace with Seattle's inflation. We had to make adjustments, diversify. I choked out the word. Financial advisors, Cody, specialists, it's boring, high-level stuff, she said, her tone utterly dismissive. The point is, after the market correction last quarter, there was nothing left to salvage except the last year of your current rent. Oh, yeah. She spread her hands in a gesture of helpless resignation. My stomach was churning violently. I need to see the complete financial statements, the audit logs, the investment authorization forms. The air temperature in the room plummeted. Kenzie, who had been lazily scrolling on her phone, suddenly looked up, a spark of cruel amusement in her eyes. Tinsley's face hardened, losing all pretense of maternal concern. I find that deeply offensive, Dakota. Your father trusted my expertise implicitly. It's heartbreaking that you don't. Sounds like someone needs to get off her high horse and get a real job. Brody scoffed, leaning back and adjusting the brim of his beanie. My cheeks burned with sudden, fierce heat. I have a job. Brody, I work 25 hours a week as a TA for the Public Policy Department while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. A real job, he repeated, the smirk widening. Not some taxpayer-funded teaching handout. Kenzie returned to her phone, now filming a piece of fruit on the table for her artisanal breakfast aesthetic. The message was unmistakable. I was an inconvenience, a spoiled, stupid orphan to be dealt with and dismissed. I pushed back from the heavy cedar table, the chair scraping against the floor. I will be getting those statements. It's my money and my future. You'll need to consult with our corporate attorney if you wish to pursue this, Tinsley said smoothly, regaining her composure. But her eyes were pinpricks of icy anger, though I wouldn't recommend it. Legal fees will eat up what little remains of your rental allowance very quickly. The threat hung in the space between silent, heavy, final. I stood up, my legs strangely numb, and began to walk toward the main staircase. I needed to grab the few things I still kept in my old room. No one followed me. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, past my old bedroom now, a sterile, gray gas suite end through my laptop, thesis notes, and a duffel bag of clothes into my backpack. On my way down, I passed the door to my father's massive, custom-built studio, located in the lower wing of the house. I hadn't been in there since his funeral. Something a desperate, aching need for connection. A final glimpse of the father who promised to protect me pulled me toward it. I opened the heavy soundproof door and flipped the lights. The huge, beautiful space smelling of sawdust, varnish. And my father's particular sweat was still there, but it was desecrated. And in the very center of the room, standing where his finest work had always been done, it's my mother's vintage 1950s custom-built woodworking lathe. It wasn't just any lathe. It was a custom-built industrial heirloom passed down from her grandfather. The machine Dad credited with every beautiful curve he'd ever created. It was priceless, irreplaceable. The elegant dark green industrial enamel had been completely obliterated. It's painted over in a garish, toxic-looking bright yellow. Giant metallic vinyl letter stickers screamed vibes only across the machine housing. The brass plaque engraved with my grandfather's name was covered in thick, runny paint. A silk scarf was draped over the tool rest, and 2 of Kelsey's ring lights were set up to film it. "Oh, that!" Kelsey's voice, suddenly right behind me, made me jump. She was leaning in the doorway, phone in hand. "It's for my new vintage industrial aesthetic series. It's like totally trending. Had to paint over that hideous institutional green first, though. So much better in yellow." I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about money. This was about erasure. My family's legacy, the heart of their artistry, had been turned into a prop for Kelsey Monroe's content. I walked out of the studio, past Kelsey's smug phone-filming face, without a word. The soundproof door closing behind me with a quiet, terrifying finality. Downstairs, I didn't say goodbye to Tinsley or acknowledge Brody's presence. I simply got into my battered, paid-off Ford Focus, the same car I'd driven since high school, and pulled away from the soaring, timber-framed structure that used to be home. Hands shaking violently on the wheel, I drove onto the familiar streets of Seattle. The reality of my situation settling in like a deep, wet Puget Sound fog. $512.38 in my checking account. Rent for my grad student apartment due in 10 days. And my future, my entire plan stolen by the woman my father trusted. The humiliation burned hotter and deeper than the anger. I drove aimlessly until twilight. The Seattle skyline, a mocking display of glass and steel reflecting the prosperity that was no longer mine. I needed a place to sleep. The illuminated back corner of a 24-hour gym seemed secure enough. Inside, I counted out $10 bills. It's the cash that would buy me a monthly membership, my new rent for shower access and reliable heat. The clerk barely looked up as he processed the payment. Back in the car, I reclined the seat, using my coat as a makeshift pillow. Tomorrow, I'd figure out how to stop the hemorrhaging. Tonight, I just needed to survive the dark. Rain started immediately, drumming a frantic, lonely rhythm against the windshield. I moved the focus to a far corner of a massive grocery store parking lot. Joining a scattering of other vehicles that clearly housed the temporarily displaced. By morning, my neck was stiff and my stomach was in knots. Campus buildings opened at 6:30 a.m. I could study there, use the fast Wi-Fi, and stay warm during the day. But first, I needed money. Lots of it. My campus job as a TA paid barely enough to cover utilities, nowhere near enough to survive the sudden loss of my housing fund. I called Marcus Chen, my study partner from the law school, who I'd become close with during late-night public policy research sessions. "Hey, Cody," he answered, his voice groggy. "Need the constitutional case files already?" "Hey, Marcus." "No, quick favor. There's some unexpected mold and water damage in my place, and I need a secure, temporary address for official mail. Could I use yours for a few weeks?" Mold and water damage. The shame made the lie taste like ash. Mold? That's awful. You know how bad that can get? Of course, use it. Do you need a place to crash? I'm technically between roommates right now. The offer felt like a physical lifeline, but the shame was a heavy anchor. "No, I'm staying with my Uncle Bo temporarily. Just need the mailing address to be safe." "Sure thing. You know the address?" "The complex near the law school, 4th and Cherry. Just let me know when to start looking out for stuff." I jotted down the address, thanked him profusely, and hung up before he could ask any more difficult questions. Small victory, one less thing to worry about. The coffee stand near the quad had a help wanted sign plastered on the window. The manager, a wary-looking man named Ben, interviewed me on the spot. "Can you start tomorrow?" 4 a.m. shift. My lead barista just walked out. I nodded, throat tight. "Yes, absolutely." "Great. $8.50 an hour plus tips. Mostly early morning commuters and grad students. The tips are decent." 4 a.m. I calculated the distance from the parking lot to campus about 2 miles. Walking would save the little gas I had left. By sunset that night, I had secured a second job tutoring online in my field and a weekend waitressing gig at an old-school diner called The Anchor. 3 jobs, no home, and my final exams for the quarter were in 4 weeks. My first full paycheck arrived a week later, $387.12 after taxes. I stared at the paper in my hand, this thin piece of evidence that I was still fighting. My feet were already blistered from walking everywhere. My back constantly ached from the unforgiving seat of the Focus. But that check meant I could eat something besides gas station ramen and coffee shop rejects. As I folded the check and tucked it into my wallet next to the audio recording of Tinsley's betrayal, something hard and cold solidified inside me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. And one day, when I had more than 3 figures in my checking account, Tinsley Monroe would learn what it means to steal from a ray. But first, I had to make it through the night. The phone alarm sliced through the pre-dawn silence at 3:15 a.m., yanking me out of a deep, fitful sleep. For a split second, I forgot the cramped space, the damp air, the cold. Then, the grim reality of the Focus cab in a deserted warehouse parking lot crashed down. I fumbled to silence the alarm before any night patrol noticed the movement inside the car. For months, since I walked out of the house, since Tinsley's smug, immaculate face told me my entire future was liquidated. For months of a life governed by desperation, a routine worn down to the precise edges of survival. By 3:45 a.m., I was in the back of the coffee stand, tying my green apron with hands already chapped and raw from cheap industrial soap and the biting Seattle air. The morning manager, Ben, barely grunted a greeting as I clocked in. He didn't know I'd just spent the last 4 hours shivering in my car. Nobody knew, except Marcus, who still believed the mold story. The morning rush was brutal tech industry workers, needing their high-octane rocket fuel before they went to lobby my city council. The shift was a blur of steaming milk, grinding beans, and forced, hollow smiles. By 9:30 a.m., I was clocked out and driving using minimal gas to the public library downtown, where I logged into my laptop for 3 hours of online tutoring. I charged $25 an hour to explain basic municipal bond structures to pre-law students. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, explaining financial security while my own had been utterly destroyed. In between sessions, I studied my own material. The library was blessedly warm, and sometimes I would doze off, my head snapping up from a paragraph on zoning policy, certain that everyone in the quiet room could see the failure and shame radiating off me. At 2 p.m., I retreated to the library's grubby bathroom to change into my waitress uniform for The Anchor. Black pants, white shirt, the name tag that read Dakota in bubbly script. I stared at my reflection in the streaked mirror. Hollow cheeks, dull eyes with bruised shadows beneath them. I had lost 15 pounds. The night shift at The Anchor stretched from 6 p.m. to midnight. My feet throbbed in cheap non-slip shoes as I carried plates of meatloaf and clam chowder to long-haul truckers and night shift dock workers. The smell of rich, comforting food made my stomach clench, but I couldn't afford a single plate. I survived on the intentional mistakes: the burger with the wrong topping, the side of fries that were slightly too cold. Jerry, the cook, a gruff old man with a heart of gold, always seemed to mess up an order near closing time, sliding the plate my way with a rough, "Better not waste it, kid." After midnight, I drove back to my current home, rotating my parking lot location nightly. Home Depot, the 24-hour Safeway, a quiet industrial street. I learned which security guards were lenient, which lots had the fewest patrols. The knock on my window came at least twice a week, sometimes security, sometimes police. I had perfected my script, just resting before the long drive home, sir. Long shift. I kept my student ID prominently displayed. Most let me be. Some told me to move along. The fear was a constant companion, a cold, hard stone resting in my chest. Fear of being caught, of failing my finals, of the future stretching out endlessly like this. Working 3 jobs while the money from my father's life work sat in Tinsley's high-profile, corrupt lobbying projects. Tonight, rain turned to something else. An icy drumming against the roof of the Focus. The temperature had been dropping all week. Faved the local news warning of an unusual Arctic blast moving through Washington, a once-in-a-decade snowstorm. For everyone else, it was an inconvenience. For me, with a heater that hadn't properly worked in a month, it was an existential threat. I woke up shaking. Not a normal cold, but violent, full-body tremors. My head throbbed. When I pressed my palm to my forehead, my skin burned against my icy fingers. Outside, large, heavy flakes were falling. Snow in Seattle. I fumbled for my phone. The battery read 17%. My breath bloomed in clouds inside the tiny cab. The shivering wouldn't stop. This was it. Rock bottom. Curled in the back of a beat-up car during a freak snowstorm, burning with fever, completely invisible to the world. No one would miss me until I failed to show up for the 4 a.m. shift. And even then, Ben would just be annoyed about coverage. I thought about my mother, about my father's promise. I thought about Tinsley's cold eyes and the yellow-painted lathe. The anger that usually kept me warm had been replaced by a terrifying numbness. My thoughts moved slowly, thickly, wading through molasses. This is really bad. With shaking fingers, I found Marcus's contact. The phone rang 3 times before his sleepy voice answered. "Cody, it's like 4 in the morning. What's up?" My teeth chattered so hard I could barely form words. I'm really sick. I'm in my car." A pause. Then Marcus was instantly alert. "Your car." "Wait, what? Where are you?" "Parking lot. The Home Depot on Aurora." "You're sleeping in your car." "What the hell, Cody? I'm coming right now." "Stay on the phone." I could hear the rustle of clothing, the clink of keys. "Can't phone dying? Then text me your exact location. I'll find you. Do not hang up until you absolutely have to. You hear me?" I managed to text him the GPS pin, then curled deeper into my coat and sleeping bag. The shivering became violent, almost convulsive. It took Marcus 26 agonizing minutes to find me. His headlights swept across the fogged windows, and then he was pounding on the glass, his face a mask of absolute shock and fear in the glow of his phone. "Jesus Christ, Cody." He yanked the door open, the blast of icy air making me gasp. His warm, strong hand touched my forehead, and he instantly recoiled. "You're burning up. How long have you been living in your car?" Marcus's voice was a rough whisper, thick with disbelief and terror. For months, I managed to choke out the word, muffled by the cold air and my coat collar. His face crumpled, a mask of immediate pain and fury. "Why didn't you tell me?" Why the mold lie? Ashamed. The single word felt heavier than the 4 months of lies. Marcus didn't argue. He gently, firmly helped me out of the Focus and into his car, immediately cranking the heat to the maximum setting. I was barely conscious during the short, agonizing drive back to his apartment, aware only of the blessed. Scalding warmth and the sound of his voice, low and urgent, explaining something to someone on the phone. "She's my cousin. Emergency situation. She's really sick. No, I don't care about the guest policy. I'll deal with it later." At his apartment, the world swam in a hot, painful haze. Marcus half carried me inside. I was only vaguely aware of being lowered onto a sofa, covered in what felt like 300 pounds of blankets. And then the blessed darkness of delirium claimed me. I woke up hours later, damp with sweat, the throbbing pain in my head receding. Marcus was sitting beside the couch, leaning forward, pressing a fresh, cold cloth to my forehead. "Your fever broke about an hour ago," he said, his voice exhausted but steady. "It was 104, Cody. I almost took you to the ER, I swear. We have to talk about that can't afford it instinct you've got. Can't afford it, I mumbled. The conditioned response automatic. Yeah, I figured. His voice was gentle, but his grip on the cloth was firm. So now you are going to tell me everything. And I mean everything. No more mold stories. No more Uncle Bo's temporary stay. Every detail, starting with that meeting with Tinsley. The story poured out of me. The dining room table, the clinical detachment in Tinsley's eyes. The lie about the market crash, the recording. The 4 months of homelessness, the constant, grinding anxiety, the fever, and the near miss in the snow. I didn't hold back, not even the shame. With each word, I felt a shift, a lightness. The telling felt like taking a shard of glass out of a long festering wound. When I finished, Marcus sat back, his eyes glittering with a cold, righteous anger that mirrored my own. You are staying right here until we figure out the next step. Period, he declared, pushing the blankets higher around my chest. My roommates will deal with it, or I'll find a new place to crash. I don't care. But you are not going back to that car, Cody. You could have died out there. Seriously, died. I knew he was right. The storm and the fever had been a deadly combination. But more than the survival. I realized the full confession and the near-death experience had forged something new and hard within me. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had morphed. I had survived the absolute worst. I had hit true rock bottom, and I was still breathing. 2 days later, feeling shaky but stable, I was well enough to return to my 3 jobs. But my few, meager possessions were moved permanently to Marcus's living room sofa. The first thing I did was upload the precious, toxic audio file of Tinsley's admission to 3 separate encrypted cloud storage services. Then I started a digital journal, cuelessly documenting every interaction with Tinsley since my father's death. Every financial threat, every smug dismissal. The shame was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity and a singular purpose. I didn't just want survival anymore. I wanted the kind of justice that hurt. A week later, I was back on the graveyard shift at the Anchor Diner, still pale but steady on my feet. I was wiping down the sticky laminate counter at 3 a.m. when the bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival. I looked up, ready to greet another weary trucker or college kid. But the man standing in the doorway, impeccably tailored in a dark charcoal cashmere coat, looked impossibly out of place against the checkered floor and vinyl booths. He scanned the nearly empty diner, and his eyes, dark and sharp, landed on me with an instantaneous jolt of recognition and shock. Dakota, he said, the name cracking slightly in his throat. Is that really you? My heart seized to my chest. Uncle Bo Ledger, my mother's older brother, the retired naval architect, the man who had vanished from my life after Dad's second marriage, the one who had warned my father about Tinsley Monroe. The timing was surreal, a cosmic joke delivered at 3 a.m. in a greasy diner. Uncle Bo's face was bone white under the harsh fluorescent lights. His hands, adorned with a sleek, minimalist titanium watch, gripped the edge of the counter. My God, Cody! His eyes swept over my greasy uniform, the dark circles under my eyes, the gauntness of my face. I've been trying to find you for weeks. Your phone was disconnected. The apartment was empty. I thought. He trailed off, the unspoken word, dead, hanging between us. I wiped my hands on my stained apron, struggling to process the powerful, wealthy man standing in the Anchor. Sorry about the phone, Uncle Bo. Couldn't afford the bill. Bo's gaze lingered on my work shoes, my cheap uniform. His jaw visibly tightened. He glanced at Jerry, the cook, who was watching us suspiciously from the kitchen window. When does your shift end? He asked, his voice low and firm. 5, I replied. I'm waiting, he said simply, sliding into a booth. And I want a coffee, black. The next 2 hours were an agonizing crawl. I dropped a tray of mugs and fumbled in order, hyper-aware of Bo's presence. His eyes tracking my every move across the floor. When my replacement finally arrived, I hung my apron and grabbed my backpack. Bo stood, leaving a crisp $100 bill under his cup, a ludicrous amount for a $2 coffee. My car's outside, he stated. His matte black Tesla Model S looked alien and predatory next to my faded Focus. I hesitated, my hand on the handle of my own car door. "Leave it," Bo said, his voice brooking no argument. "We'll come back for it." The drive was silent. Bo navigated the empty downtown Seattle streets, eventually pulling up to the imposing classic stone facade of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. A valet materialized instantly. "You're staying here?" I asked ridiculously. Of course he was. The Fairmont, where the rooms cost more than my monthly wages. "I was giving a talk at a tech summit that got postponed," he explained, referring to a major marine tech convention. "Or, I suppose, is today." "Get in." Sweet swallowed me whole, a vast space of old-world luxury, polished cherry wood, and immense windows overlooking the city. I stood awkwardly in the entryway, acutely aware of the stale diner grease clinging to my clothes and hair. "Showers through there?" Bo pointed, already pulling out his phone. "I'll order room service." "Everything you can possibly think of." The bathroom was bigger than Marcus's entire apartment. I stood under the scalding water until my skin was pink, scrubbing away for months of cold dread and cheap soap. When I emerged in one of the hotel's ridiculously plush robes, a feast was laid out on the dining table. Eggs, thick-cut bacon, fresh fruit, pancakes, real orange juice, and strong coffee. I sat down, my hands trembling as I reached for a piece of toast. The first bite of real hot, high-quality food nearly brought me to my knees with an unexpected wave of emotional relief. "Eat," Bo commanded, pouring coffee. "And then you are going to tell me everything. Start with why my niece is working graveyard shifts in a diner and looking like she's a ghost." So I told him everything. The story flowed out of me. Tinsley, the trust fund, the crypto excuse, the $950,000 theft, the neon yellow lathe. My voice caught when I described the desecration of the machine, the heart of my father's studio. "She painted Mom and Dad's most valuable legacy," I whispered, tears finally blurring my vision. "Bright yellow. For Kenzie's Instagram." Bo's knuckles were stark white as he gripped his coffee cup. But he remained silent, letting me finish every grim detail. The recording, the car, the Planet Fitness showers, the near-fatal fever, Marcus's rescue. "You nearly died," he finally said, his voice flat, dangerously quiet. "In a parking lot? While that woman lived in your father's house, spending your money on waterfront property for her lobbying firm." I nodded, the lump in my throat almost choking me. "And now?" he asked, setting the cup down. What do you want to happen now?" The question paralyzed me. For months, I had only thought about surviving. Want felt like an insult to the reality of my exhaustion. I started, my voice failing. Then the image of the yellow lathe, the desecrated brass plaque, flooded my mind, and the hard, cold thing inside me ignited. I want what's mine, and I want her to pay for what she did. I want to see Tinsley Monroe lose everything. Bo nodded slowly, pulling out his phone. "Roy, it's Bo Ledger. I need you on the first flight to Seattle. Family emergency. Yes, bring the forensic audit team. I need everything she has torn apart." He hung up and looked at me, his face grim. "She will fight back, Cody. She will call you a liar, unstable, and tell everyone you've fabricated this whole story because of grief. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the fever, the focus, the fear. I thought about my father's trust and my mother's lathe. "I am," I said, the word tasting like clean iron. "Find everything." 24 hours later, Uncle Bo Ledger's lawyer, a man named Roy Walker, arrived in Seattle. Tall, lean, with silver hair and the quiet, almost arrogant confidence of someone who charged an outrageous sum per hour, he got straight to work. He spread documents across the Fairmont Suites dining table, the polished cherry wood surface now serving as a war room. "We'll serve her with an emergency petition for an accounting of the trust today," he explained, his fingers tapping the legal stationery. "The audio recording gives us the grounds for an immediate freeze on all assets tied to the fund." I nodded, watching him work with grim fascination. Bo paced behind him, making hushed, powerful phone calls. Pulling strings I didn't know existed, the kind of strings only a long-retired, highly successful naval architect with deep industry ties could pull. How do you think Tinsley will react? I asked, my voice still sounding foreign to my own ears. Mr. Walker looked up, his expression grim. Like a cornered animal, Miss Ray, with everything she has, and she has a lot of connections. It was right. Within hours, Tinsley's counter-response arrived via a frantic courier. Mr. Walker scanned the document, his eyebrows rising slightly. Creative, he murmured. The closest thing to a joke I'd heard from him. She's threatening to file a restraining order against Beau on your behalf. She claims he's harassing you and exerting undue influence, exploiting your grief to try and steal the remnants of the trust. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. That's ridiculous. He saved my life. It's smart, Mr. Walker corrected. Unflappable. She's establishing a narrative, the manipulative relative preying on the unstable orphan. Fortunately, he tapped his tablet. I've already filed for an emergency court order to freeze all her primary lobbying investment accounts. Judge Ramirez owes me a significant favor. The next 48 hours were a blur of intense legal maneuvers. I barely slept, afraid that if I closed my eyes, this powerful lifeline would vanish and I'd be back in the focus. Beau canceled all his talks and worked remotely from the suite. Mr. Walker disappeared into meetings with auditors, forensic accountants, and bankers. When he returned on the third day, his thin lips curved into a slight, predatory smile, the first true show of emotion I'd seen. We've got her, he announced, opening his briefcase. The forensic audit tracked the $950,000 transfer, plus another $120,000 we didn't know about, totaling over $1 million. She wasn't even particularly clever, Miss Ray. She just assumed you'd never look deeper than her. Crypto crash excuse. He laid out diagrams showing how the money flowed through to LLCs before, landing in the seed capital for Tinsley's most recent major lobbying project, a massive, controversial waterfront development. She just counted on the fact that you were too exhausted and too grieving to fight back. Beau examined the documents. What's her next play, Roy? Already underway, Mr. Walker replied, producing another file. Her team just produced these documents, supposedly authorizing the high-risk investments. He slid a piece of paper toward me. Is this your signature, Miss Ray? I studied the document, a formal letter granting Tinsley broad authorization to invest trust funds in higher-risk tech sector ventures at her sole discretion. At the bottom sat a signature that was supposed to be mine, Dakota Ray. No, I said, my blood turning to ice. I have never seen this in my life. I didn't sign this. Mr. Walker's smile grew wider, showing teeth now. We've got her. This just went from civil fraud to multiple criminal felonies. Forgery, wire fraud, falsifying a federal document. He closed the file with a decisive snap. Tinsley Monroe is done. Beau placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. You understand what this means, Cody? She's going to jail. Not just paying back your money, jail. I stared at the forged document, imagining Tinsley sitting in her high-end office, practicing my name, calculating how to steal my future. For 4 months, I had been consumed by survival, fear, and a dull, heavy hopelessness. Now, something else rose, a cold, sharp clarity that felt almost like profound relief. Good, I said. 3 days later, the mahogany-paneled conference room at Walker & Associates felt like a sterile, silent battleground. I sat stiffly in a leather chair that likely cost more than my focus. Across the gleaming table, Tinsley adjusted her cream silk suit, her diamond tennis bracelet, catching the light as she leaned toward her attorney. Brody slouched beside her, thumbing through his phone with exaggerated boredom. My palms were sweating against my thighs, but the feeling was manageable. The weight of the past 4 months, the car, the fever, the crushing despair, was now a controlled weight I could bear. Beau's hand found my shoulder, squeezing once. I am no longer alone. Let's begin. Mr. Walker's voice cut through the tension. Tinsley's attorney spoke first, his voice honeyed but razor-sharp. My client is here out of courtesy, but we must note our intention to countersue for defamation and emotional distress. Miss Ray is a clearly troubled young woman who has fabricated these allegations. His gaze flicked to me dismissively. Tinsley leaned forward, her face a perfected mask of maternal concern. Dakota, sweetheart, I know these months have been difficult, but these accusations. She shook her head, a show of gentle disappointment. Your father trusted me. I only ever acted in your best interest. In fact, she continued, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, Dakota repeatedly begged me to make riskier investments. She wanted the fund to grow faster. I advised against it, but she was adamant. The lie, audacious and poisonous, hung in the air. I didn't move. Brody smirked, checking his ridiculous watch. Can we wrap this up? Some of us have actual businesses to run. Mr. Walker, unruffled, placed a heavy black leather binder on the table and slid it toward Tinsley's attorney. Before we proceed further, I believe you should review this information. His tone was conversational, almost friendly. Tinsley's attorney frowned, but opened the binder. Mr. Walker ignored Tinsley and Brody, speaking only to their counsel. Tab 1 contains the complete audit trail of the trust. You'll note the systematic withdrawal of funds totaling $1,070,000. The attorney flipped the pages, his expression remaining professional and readable. Tab 2 documents the formation of two shell companies, both signed by Tinsley Monroe as primary officer. Tab 3 contains the incorporation papers for the waterfront lobbying project. The primary capitalization source matches dollar for dollar, the funds extracted from Miss Ray's trust. The attorney's mask slipped. His eyes darted to Tinsley, then back to the binder. Tab 4 is perhaps the most illuminating. Mr. Walker nodded to me. I placed my phone on the table. My hands were perfectly steady. I pressed play. Tinsley's voice, captured in the attic, filled the silent room. That fund was a lifesaver. My new venture couldn't have launched without that seed capital. She'll never know. By the time she's 28, it'll all be settled. Her father was so naive to think I'd let that money just sit there for her. Tinsley's face drained completely, hardening into something cold and terrifying. Brody's phone slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the table. And finally, Tab 5. Mr. Walker's voice remained mild, almost bored. A comprehensive analysis from the leading forensic handwriting examiner in the country. She confirms with 100% certainty that Miss Ray's signature was forged on all authorization documents for the higher-risk investments you claim she begged for. The room fell silent. Tinsley's attorney slowly closed the binder, sliding it away as if it were toxic. He leaned toward her, whispering urgently. For the first time, I saw Tinsley's composure completely shatter. The veneer of the concerned stepmother, the grieving widow, the savvy lobbyist, all of it gone. What remained was raw, ugly fury. Mr. Walker slid a document across the table. Our terms are straightforward. Full restitution of the $1,070,000 plus $600,000 in punitive and emotional damages. You will liquidate your lobbying projects and sell the house. Miss Ray retains all rights to her father's intellectual property and personal effects. Tinsley's perfectly lined lips parted in a silent, savage snarl. You'll sign that. Or will you'll sign, Mr. Walker interrupted, his voice steel. Or this binder goes to the federal district attorney, who is already expecting my call. Forgery, embezzlement, criminal breach of fiduciary duty. You'll be in a cell by dinner. Brody's bravado evaporated. Mom. She silenced him with a blazing glare. Picked up the pen with fingers trembling not from fear but from white-hot rage, and signed her name with savage, stabbing strokes. As she dropped the pen, Mr. Walker added, "Oh, and the DA is getting the file anyway." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with incomprehension. What? But we settled. You've settled the civil complaint. My client isn't pressing criminal charges. Mr. Walker smiled thinly. The state of Washington is They take a rather dim view of trustees who defraud their beneficiaries. The realization hit her like a physical blow. 18 months, Bo said quietly, his first words of the meeting. Minimum sentence for these crimes. That's if you cooperate fully. I stood, my legs surprisingly steady. I had imagined this moment for months. Tinsley's downfall, my vindication. I expected triumph. Instead, there was a quiet, profound sense of closure. The lathe, I said, my voice steady, adult. My mother's lathe. I want it restored. Every trace of that yellow paint removed. Paid for out of the sale of the house. Tinsley's eyes narrowed, a last flash of defiance. It'll cost thousands. Yes, I agreed. It will. I walked out without looking back, the sound of her frustrated rage muffled behind the thick mahogany door. In the hallway, morning sunlight streamed through the windows. I paused and let the warmth touch my face. For the first time in months, I took a deep, clean breath. The war was over. I had survived. 6 months later, morning sunlight spilled through the bay windows of my small apartment, casting golden rectangles across the hardwood floor. The cramped focus and the 24-hour parking lots felt like a nightmare I'd read about. I ran my fingers along the edge of my simple drafting table. The restored lathe wasn't here, but in my late father's old studio, now managed by a foundation I created. I opened my acceptance letter. Masters in Public Policy, deferred admission. Classes start next week. Bo arrived, punctual as always, for our quarterly review. As we discussed the new secure municipal bond investments, I proposed an idea. The $600,000 in punitive damages is cleared. Uncle Bo, I want to establish the Sarah Ray Legacy Foundation. It will provide emergency housing grants and legal aid to college students facing sudden financial homelessness due to family betrayal or fraud. 3 years passed in a blink. I stood at a podium facing 200 guests at the foundation's first major fundraiser. Bo beamed in the front row. Beside him sat Marcus, now a newly minted corporate lawyer who served on our advisory board. The Sarah Ray Legacy Foundation isn't just about money, I told the crowd. It's about what happens when financial crisis collides with family betrayal. Resilience isn't just about surviving what's thrown at you. It's about knowing you are worth rescuing. I was 28 now, fully in control of my inheritance, my education completed. More importantly, I had built a legacy born from loss, a sanctuary forged from betrayal. I was my mother's daughter, my father's child, and finally, entirely my own.